think that's one of the coolest things about that project was like we got a rare chance to kind of go inside and just see like a whole other world, which was both very daunting and exciting at the same time.
Welcome to
KSDL.
Oh my god, it was so good. Okay. You might hear an extra voice. We have a special guest today.
So recently, Alistair shared his experience about a design project of a very, very interesting subject in Singapore, which is reshaping the living spaces of our migrant workers. We thought that it was a very interestingly obscure topic. As you know, like migrant workers is a strong identity in Singapore. I think it's a very recognizable, yet could be well disputed as well. So we decided to grab Ali, who is here with us, to share with us his experience and also what he has learned, and maybe shed some light in this pretty obscure topic on designing for migrant workers. Yeah. So before we jump into this exciting discussion, let's give a warm welcome to Alistair!
Thank you. I am Alistair Norris. I am founder and I guess lead designer at a company called Brief. Keepitbrief.co, not .com. .com leads you to an underwear website, so don't go there.
It's a good thing you told us.
Yeah. Apart from that, we're a tiny team of, at the moment, 3 of us, kind of focusing on social design, design research, interaction, multidisciplinary practice. For very quick context, Brief is run that I take graduates every 2 years. After the second year, I then kick them out and have to go spread the good word of human-centered design and design research out into the world. So I have my first batch. My aim was to find people that are interested in doing their own thing after the 2 years. So whether that is going into something that is very generalist or like not, I guess not specialist, the idea being when you leave Brief, you'll have a kind of more public portfolio of work that is designed to kind of let you go whatever direction you want to go. Outside of that, I am a part-time adjunct lecturer at NUS, focused on platforms and thesis work, and also design fundamentals, which is fun.
And that's NUS Industrial Design.
Industrial
right?
Design, yes.
How long have you been teaching?
I think this is my 3rd year now.
Okay.
Yeah. I did a little bit of guest lecturing before at my old university in Dundee in Scotland, but first time doing it every week. Meant to be 8 hours, more like 16 hours a week. Not to put DID on blast, but that's my own doing. I can't stop my consults at the right time.
Nice.
And apart from that, I think that's pretty much me. Used to work at agency, also used to work at IDEO, and a company called Referral Candy. But the project we're going to talk about is from my time at agency.
An agency is a design agency in Singapore.
Yes.
I like how these names are confusing.
Yeah. I worked at a company called Agency where everyone complained about the name. Then I started a company called Brief where everyone complains about the name.
Keep it brief.
It always seems like a good idea at the time.
Why Brief though?
It was meant to be similar to the way Agency is meant to be multi-meaning. So was Brief. So I wanted to do small, impactful work that was kind of contained within well-intentioned briefs, where the idea of the brief comes from. Then I wanted to do lots of different kinds of work. So I wanted it to be like brief-ish engagements where you can hire me for as long as you want if anyone's listening. And then also I just wanted a short name that was memorable. I wanted to call it Common Dreads at first, but it got vetoed by everybody I asked.
Common Dreads.
Common Dreads, yeah.
Like DREAD.
Yeah. It's like tackling our world's common dreads, but no.
Yeah, not as common.
No, it's not as good as Brief. Brief seems to work. People remember.
Do you think people actually applied to Brief thinking that it's their underwear company?
I get more traffic
Models.
on the website than I would expect. And sometimes I put in keepitbrief.com and the underwear is, I tried to buy it at one point and they asked for like $125 $1,000
Oh,
for the
wow.
domain name. So
For the domain
yeah,
name.
so it'll be keepitbrief.co.
Oh, you could have done
from now
them
on.
a favor by putting a link in your website saying, if you're looking for the underwear, click here.
Yeah, that would have been good. I think at the same time, like, it's now kind of feeding into the culture a bit. So I have 2 employees. Shout out Engang and Clarissa, who are
Hello.
my pair of briefs. And then someone just
Are they from Uniqlo?
they are. And then we had someone the other day describe our if we get a project, it should be called a briefcase, which is pretty good. It's pretty good.
And
All
you
this
should-
wordplay.
You should have a real briefcase.
They just bring it with me everywhere. If you see my bag, it barely stays together. So no, it'd be good.
That's
It'd be good.
nice.
So figuring that all out.
Okay, so basically, it's no secret that Singapore is heavily dependent on foreign labor. It all started in the 1980s and 90s when Singapore's leadership implemented policies to foster economic growth and also help growing businesses cope with the labor shortages. So in the news, in 2021, MOM has introduced a new set of standards for future dorms to adhere to. So maybe Ellie, you can tell us a bit more. How did Dormitory Association Singapore reached out to the agency?
Cool. Okay. DASL came to agency with the problem statement of how do we make dormitories feel more like home? A home away from home, I think was the actual term. And asked us to think about it as a space, what I would describe as like a space, roles, tools, and processes. And then come up with some, basically prototype a physical space. So we would take over a room in the dormitory and test our ideas live after doing a research study. So at the same time as like doing the more, how do you make home away from home? It was also what does it look like when we actually implement these rules that have come down from the Ministry of Manpower of what are the new regulations, which is it's quite fun and hard and sweaty, is what I'd say. Even for context, the Dormitory Association of Singapore is a body that's made up of lots of the different dorms. So we were kind of tasked by them to go, okay, what would it look like if we designed dormitories specifically just for creating comfort and a sense of home inside of the dormitories, which was a cool challenge when they came to us. So this project started in the middle of COVID, when all of these very important but much more administrative changes were going on inside of what made up good dormitory design. And then the question came up was like, what makes more like human centered or more personable or more humane, that's probably the right word, design inside of dormitories.
But what was the cause of it? Was it because they were getting a lot of complaints?
So I think there's like multi-prongs for this. When DASL was first founded, they had like 10 targets or principles that they wanted to go for. And when you look into it, they kind of smashed it out the park because they were actually quite, I don't want to say they were simpler. From a logistics standpoint, they were super difficult, but it was things like no more triple-decker bunks and stuff like that. Like no more, the distance between the roof and the migrant worker's bed had to be more than like a meter. That's the founding principles of why the association was founded in the first place, was these 10 agreed between MOM, the dormitories, and I think it was HealthServe, and I might be wrong on that, but I can check, who is a charity based on like more the health side of migrant workers. And they'd kind of, again, like I said, kind of smashed these out of the park maybe about 10 years ago. And since then, they kind of trying to figure out what their role really was. That's how we saw it ourselves, which was achieved what you set out to do, still around. How do you set the next 10 goals or set the next principles of what it really means to be in charge of setting the standard of dormitories? Because that separation between being an association that's kind of leading the way, almost like I would, from the UK perspective, I call it like a watchdog in some sense, versus who is the regulator, which is MOM, kind of going like, this is base minimum standards. DASL's job and kind of asked to us was, what does next look like? What does good look like for us? Which was, I don't know if it was so much a specific event that caused it, but I think it was more of a question that as they were going through the experience of COVID, I mean, I'm sure you guys remember that moment where they delivered can I swear?
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
a crap ton of like Chinese food to a bunch of Indian and Bangladeshi guys, and they were like, we can't eat this, right? It was like they were kind of going through that, and it was just like, where is all the kind of thought process and more consideration going on inside of the dormitory, and why is that kind of taking second seat to the health protocols coming in?
I think also because you mentioned it's during COVID time, maybe there was the restriction to stay in the dorms, right? Maybe that also triggered this even further, because there was a lot of people in the dorm, stuck in the dorm, and then they realized that, okay, hey, there's a problem.
The dorms, even the word dorm, you can't really use the word dorm. Dormitories don't feel like home at the moment.
Why can't we use dorms?
Oh, okay. So I think dorms has a certain connotation to it, of them being, and I think this is something I kind of picked up a lot from the both the managers inside and the operators, that it's kind of seen as a negative term, versus dormitory is a bit fairer. I think one of the things is it's weird because I've built empathy from this project for a lot of different people, and like when I speak to like the managers inside, but a lot of them reject the term dorm because they take a lot of pride. Yeah. It's the same way that when we talk about, one of the big things we got from this was like the term migrant worker is very reductive and very. Then the guys in the dorms are so much more complex than that term. Even the way I still do it is kind of like brush an entire population of people as just workers, which is hard to disconnect because you are talking about a large group of people, but it can accidentally be quite, I'd say discriminatory is probably the word I would use.
It's very interesting because I used to think dorm is just the shortcut saying for dormitories, you know?
And I think even then, like, there's so many versions of dormitories. So, like, you see, like, when I speak to my students about it, they stay in dorms and they call it dorms. And it's like, I think that's the other thing as well, is like the complexity between those different kinds of spaces that even though they actually are quite similar, actually, I think they are very similar. The difference is like quality of furniture, quality of like actual living conditions, stuff like that is where it starts to differ, and that goes both ways. I think my experience has been migrant workers look after their space sometimes better than students do. So
maybe it's an age thing.
I think it definitely comes down to it. One of the largest dormitories in Singapore is I'd never seen something like it. It's like a whole constituency of people, and you'll have you better look down at night from one of the floors and just see just tens of thousands of people just socializing. And like you'll see like basketball courts, you'll see some guys just like some guys will just be drinking, you'll see just like some people just sitting down and talking to them. You'll see a sea of like phones of people phoning home, just like sitting on the ground trying to find somewhere private to call their spouse or like call their kids before they get home, stuff like that. And it's just like you just don't see that anywhere else.
You know, it feels like, you know, SimCity.
So
you have like that God's view, right? And then you just zoom into a part and you just see like life spawning there. So talk us through your design process. So if you could break it down, the different phases.
Cool. So the good thing about this is it's the same for most projects I do. So we have like a quite heavy research phase, which is about 3 months of just on the ground. Can we learn enough about this problem that we think we can make an impact? And then we went into synthesizing, where we just like deep dive into, okay, here's everything we've learned, what actually matters and what's in the realm of what we need to solve. Then we went into design, quite a short sprint. It was like, what do we think some of the solutions are? And that was with the Dormitory Association. So we had a bunch of like very large workshops with hundreds of people from all levels, from cleaners to the top operators to the guys who run the dorms, just ideating, which was fun, to taking those ideas, choosing the ones that we think we could actually test realistically, and then building it, taking over a room, building it. We call that prototyping. I think in total we had about 20 different ongoing prototypes in that space, some digital, some physical, some more process driven. And then it was taking all of those learnings, turning it all into a set of guidelines and principles in a book with actionables that could be basically distributed to all of the dormitories from then on, that they can then start implementing themselves.
So how long was the whole process?
The whole process, I think, was about 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah, total. Yeah.
But I guess the research took a lot.
Research took a long time because I think, like you guys are saying, it's it's hard to know what's going on inside the dormitories until you actually spend time in there. So I think initially we scoped 4 weeks. And then, like, I think we were like, we'll just see. I don't know what we were thinking. It was like, we'll see like 3 to 5 dormitories, and that'll give us an idea. And on the first day, it was like, actually, there's 3 to 5 different categories of dormitory, and you were like, oh. And then suddenly it was like, okay, we need to see. I think we ended up seeing about 18 dormitories all across the island, different sizes, different scales, different operators. And even then, I still don't think it was enough. But we spent, I think, in total about 3 months just inside of the dormitories, just trying to understand what the ecosystem was like, which is, some of them are mini cities. We're talking like bigger than my hometown, like 80,000 people inside of one dormitory sort of size. And inside of there you have like barbershops and copetiums, you have supermarkets.
I'm assuming here lah, but is it the whole like NIMBY thing? Not in my backyard. And then they try to keep like this self-sustaining civilization away from the actual Singapore population.
I thought about this a lot, right? And I think there's 2 parts of it. You can see it as there's definitely 2 sides of Singapore. One that is definitely much more migrant worker focused, and one that is like Sinky focused, I guess as you would call it, right? Versus
Sinky.
It's also when it comes down to it, it's like where else can you put that many people that are staying in type of different kind of accommodation. But then the more you dig into it, the more complex it gets. So you have like what are called purpose-built dorms, which are the large ones that everyone knows. But then amongst us in town everywhere, there's things called factory converted, which is like smaller dorms, usually owned by employers, usually housing between like 50 or 60 of their own workers. But they just look like HDBs, which is so confusing. So you're like, we'll go to visit, when we had to go visit a dormitory, you end up right next to what looks like a condominium.
Oh, wow.
And you'll be speaking to, and then you'll speak to the manager that runs it, and they'll be like, yeah, people phone us to find out if we can come view an apartment. And then once you get inside, it's like a whole different world. But from the outside, they're so blended in, it's actually hard to tell what is outside of the large purpose-built ones that are dormitories.
It's like false advertising.
Yeah. So you have the one that we prototyped in was called the Leo. Has beautiful signage outside, quite a nice dormitory. Looks like a condo from the outside.
Wow.
Which is just, the only difference is, especially during COVID, I think the biggest sign that you can see that COVID was going on is the main point of transport for a lot of these guys outside of like the trucks, which is a whole other conversation that we can touch on, is bikes. But during COVID, because they weren't allowed to go out, you just saw like this entire line of bikes just overgrown, just like grass.
Bikes
like
as in motorbikes or bicycles?
Just bicycles.
Oh,
bicycles. Just like absorbed by the nature around it, just like bring them all in, which was just surreal because like I never really considered how many, when you think of a dormitory that might house, let's say like 14,000 people, there's at least a quarter of them have bikes. So they had to figure out where to put that, and they're just like, and then when you no longer allow them to leave for almost 2 years, I think it probably was somewhere around there. It was a very long time. You just see like nature kind of absorbing that stuff back in,
like a
which
dystopian
is,
kind of setting.
It felt weird. It felt weird. You know, I Am Legend, the film. It had like slightly that vibe to it of like overgrown. Actually, the thing is, like, this is bad, but I kind of like that overgrown feeling and look.
Any memorable things that happened when you were doing the research?
So like I have like 3 main ones that always stick out to me. One was we were touring quite a small dormitory, factory converted, and we were walking through, and we were so used by that point during the day, all the guys are out working. And we walked past this bed, and there was a guy sitting there, just stood up, said hello, and he was working from home from the dormitory, and he was just sitting there with his like a makeshift furniture that he'd found around the dormitory, and he had his laptop there, and he was doing Excel spreadsheets of like timesheets for his entire team, and it just like completely blew my mind, because I was like, everyone else was working from home, but it didn't consider that would extend to the dormitories. And what would that that's not what I imagined it would look like, but he was literally working from his bed, but it's the most professional setup, and he had like shirt and tie on. And like, he was like
what?
shirt and tie. So he was like dressed up for calls, and he was just the nicest dude ever. And I was like so taken aback. I was like, it just didn't cross my mind that this whole suddenly like not needing an office applies to this like 400,000-500,000 people in Singapore. That as you get higher up the ranks, you spend less time on the job site, so you end up in this position. And that was the first one that blew my mind. The second one was we met a I think it was probably, again, it's very COVID related, some of
Yep.
this, but like we met a guy who just really wanted to go home,
Oh.
and like he just missed his family,
Mhm.
and like that's where you get into this interesting point of a lot of these guys are very young, usually recently married,
Oh.
and the ones who have really good relationships with their partners are like used to going home once a year, but during COVID that kind of no one could travel, so some of them are just, as soon as they got a bit of drink in them, were just very emotional and wanted to talk about it. So you'd sit down for like half an hour, 45 minutes, and just talk about how much this guy loved his wife and just missed her. And then like he'd be like in tears, and I'd be like, "There's nothing I can do to help you in this situation." But
I can offer an
yeah.
ear, that's it.
And then I still think the third one, the one in research that I think was most effective to me, was I think the way you described it earlier was like SimCity view, which was like just seeing like difference between like the actual research of interviewing people and then just the observation side. So we'd spend days just sitting at the top level of dormitories, just looking down, just seeing what happened at certain times, like how traffic flowed. But I think the way that logistics or operations run inside of dormitories was so fascinating, because you see in the morning it operated like a MRT station. So you'd have like you have these security guards, and you have turnstiles so they can know who was who I mean, most of the time at that point it was used for COVID testing, but you'd see these guys walk out and they'd wait for the truck to pick them up. They would drive up, they have about 30 seconds to get in before it drives off, and then it just starts driving off. And then like everyone, so a building of like 16,000 people, everyone would get out synchronized in about 10 minutes.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is really efficient.
And then at the end you'd see the guys who'd overslept come running out and then be like, oh, and then they get on their bike and start cycling after. And
That's what the bikes are for.
Yeah. And it just felt like it just was a nice reminder that it's just like, it's just such a normal human place. In a sense, it's just like people sleep in for work.
Yeah.
People like at night phone their spouses and phone their kids. Some guys are studying at night. Some guys are playing PUBG, like delivery inside of there. Like you see all the packages being delivered every day. It's just like its own mini city inside of a city in the larger ones.
And it's all condensed within your peripherals. It's like you can see how world operates.
Yeah.
Basically.
And you can see it all from just like one standpoint. So you can just, especially the difference between like night and day, and like the way the guys cook together at night was just fascinating. So it's like all shared ingredients. Almost all of the dormitories we went to would eat at home together, and they would go to the supermarket that was inside of the dormitory because it's subsidized, and it's actually really fresh. So it's more like a wet market slash like mama pop shop style thing than it is a. But then some of them are like full blown supermarkets that just have ingredients that I've never seen before, stuff like that.
And I think it's more of catered to their taste. That's why.
100%.
Right?
Especially the fish, like the difference between like a fish I'd never seen in my life that just brought over from their home countries that they like to eat. Okay. And I'm looking at it going, I've never seen this fish.
Did they let you try it?
Yeah, we tried a bunch, and like it was always so good. There's so many roles inside of each room that you have one guy who's just the cook, who for the last like 3 to 4 years will just be only cooking, and then if he leaves and goes to another company, and he might move dormitory or he might go home, he'll pass on those skills to someone else.
Wow.
So there's like this whole like mentor apprenticeship thing going on in there that is like unfacilitated, just kind of naturally happening. And then every time we go around, they just offer us food constantly, and it's like to the point where we go and see 40 people and everyone be trying to feed us. And it's just everyone was so nice. That was one of the biggest takeaways, was like in between the beginning of the project and even halfway through, the level of English had increased so much, because a lot of the guys were super bored and trying to figure out what they were going to do during their spare time when they couldn't like go out on the weekends anymore. So they were either got into playing video games or they were learning languages.
Right.
Or my personal favorite one was they were teaching their kids things. So they became the like remote teachers for the young kids as a way just to stay connected to family, I think. So it's a lot like usually mum would stay behind in wherever they're coming from, India or Bangladesh, sometimes Myanmar, and they would just spend time at night just teaching maths or English that they'd learned, showing sites, something about world history and stuff like that. It was just wild.
I suppose after all this research, right, you definitely have a pool of observations, of pain points. My first question is, how do you determine which one is worthy to pursue? The second one is, what are those?
Cool. Okay. How do you just determine what to pursue is a fun question, because it feels weird that it's kind of in your hands at the time. I think we got described by DASL at one point as the most informed design people around dormitories. We were like, huh, it's not really been, it's cool, but it's also like, hey, it's only been like 3 months, which is like, wow, not a lot of people get to work in this. That's probably one of the hardest things about the research, was like, how do you differentiate between what is caused by COVID and what is actually just the norm inside the dormitories? And like that's probably what took us the longest time.
So how do you filter that this is COVID related and the others are the actual issues that we need to address?
A lot of it is like stakeholder interviews, which I kind of hate that term, but it was like there's so many different roles inside of the dormitories than people realize. So you could cross-reference what some of the residents were telling us versus what the cleaners would tell us, versus what the operators would tell us, versus what the managers would tell us. And that kind of eventually, after a lot of time of like connecting dots, you better go, okay, this feels like it's always been true. Versus this feels very conditional on the fact that
it's COVID.
Yeah. I think one of the best examples of that is freedom of movement. Like the ability just to walk wherever you want inside the dormitories. In the larger ones was closed off, so they would separate by block, just to stop the spread of COVID. And that was something that had never been there before. So suddenly you see certain group people have been friends for sometimes 20 years inside the dormitories, couldn't see each other anymore. Or and then it becomes this really fascinating problem where it's like, where is, like, for us, it's just like, okay, when did you put in these barriers? Can you tell us, was it this year? Was it last year? Have they always been there? And then so we'd have to sit down and have like lots of cross-referencing and checking with people who knew better than us. That's the way I'd say it.
I guess it's a lot of not trying to take things at face value and like trying to keep digging and to understand, what's the actual source.
Yeah. I think it's like because I teach it as well, I also managed to get my students to come in with me to do some work in there too, just because I had access, which was great. And like for them, it's like I teach them the 5 whys. That's just like, you must dig, everything must keep digging until my rule was always, until you kind of annoy the person, then you can pull back and stop and then just go back down. And same for us, it was like both the conversations we were having, and then once we got into synthesis, it was like, okay, but do we actually believe this? Is this true? What do we actually know? What are the, like, so much time in like Google Scholar reading through like feeder rules through MOM guidance to go, okay, when did this get implemented? And then from there it was like then taking what we knew back to people inside of there that we could trust to be very honest with us, to go, no, there's things that we thought were implemented during COVID that had always been there, for example. So we had to be like realistic on that sense, which is like, what do we know can be done? And then also, what is the highest value input?
I guess that was like more of a nice to have rather than a need, right?
Which is quite hard from when she spent like 3 months in there, you're like, all of it is a need. So then figuring out what is, like, bringing in that like business lens and sense and going, what can we do that has the most effect? And a lot of that came down to spatial considerations of just like reformatting and thinking about how you structure a room to stop things. So like one of the biggest issues we saw in there was people having food on their bed, like raw food, and a lot of it just came down to like storage. So something as simple as thinking about, hey, this is the sleeping area, here's the kind of socializing and eating area, and outside of there, before you get to the kitchen, it's like pantry. A lot of the rooms aren't set up like that. So how do you kind of set almost like a set of guidelines for people that are designing dormitories and setting them up to go, think about the room this way, because when we tested it, it worked. That's one of the biggest sources of fines that the dormitories get is from MOM, is for things like food on the beds, things like that. And it's like, if we can reduce that, everybody wins. And it turned out all the guys inside of the dormitories just didn't have anywhere. They had places to put their stuff, but it wasn't where they needed it to be. It then becomes this whole thing of like empathy on both sides. It's like being able to look at, why does MOM give out fines for this, and then also why are the guys living in the dormitories doing this, and then just finding the middle ground in between those two bits, which a lot of the time was just storage in the right place at the right time that doesn't try to force you to do anything, because a lot of it would be solved that way. Like, one of the hardest things is whatever we learn from this room will work in this room. We don't know it's going to work for every other room.
How
either.
transferable it is.
So how do you kind of then unpack that and go, what are the principles behind it that we put in and what works, and how do we turn that into more like a, this is what you have to consider when you're enabling people inside of your dormitory.
Like a more universal principle.
Yeah, 100%.
To apply to other dormitories.
Yeah, which the 3 high-level ones are, instead of designing for workers, design for husbands, fathers, and sons.
Oh, that's nice.
And it was like that itself. When we were writing them, we wrote these for ourselves originally, so we can design the right thing. We had that one. The second one was think of culture, not community, because every dormitory, even inside the dormitory, had its own specific culture. My best example of this, shout out Sylvester if you're listening, a dormitory manager at one of my favorite dorms. He's a big music guy. So inside of there, he has entire like band setup where people can just play music. So people learn to play music. They had a guy in there once was a saxophone player, and he would bring his saxophone and he would just play that, and he would just end up just like jamming with people. And like you go to a different dormitory and they'd be more like a sports dormitory because the guy that's running it used to be really into sports. So suddenly you'd see they were running the cricket league. They had I think this still blows my mind. There was a guy inside of one of the dormitories whose dream it was to be a bodybuilder. The guys who were running the dormitory were buying him whey protein so that he could bulk up and compete, and he won. They still have this like almost like one of those comically sized checks of like him winning it, and like the deal was like they just wanted to keep the check. He could keep all the money, everything like that, and they'll fund him to do it, but they want to be able to, in the dormitory, be able to go, hey, we have like the strongest migrant worker in Singapore in our dormitory. And it's like that connection between who runs the dorms and like who manages them, and the assuming that you can just make all events the same, or something we're trying to push them against, which is go think first about on all levels what you guys care about culturally and how you want your dormitory to be, and then from there design things around that. And the last one was that designed for year 3, not week 1, but the average tenure is between 5 and 9 years. So what you end up having is these guys just overloading with stuff for day to day, long term, just like right now that I'm going to eat later on tonight and I bought it cheap, which is the chicken on the bed, to clothes that I've brought that is subsidized from downstairs and I'm being encouraged to buy but I have nowhere to keep, to things that I'm going to bring home with me for my family that I've spent my wages on that you can only get in Singapore. And all of that was all kind of like they have one locker, and then how do you split that kind of up? And like what does that mean when you get to that point and you have so much stuff? Let's say like a religious ash, some of the guys they would put on their forehead every day. There was nowhere to do that, so a lot of it would just be at the bottom of your bed. So when we started building it, it was like, how do we design the beds, which is like the kind of like pegboards at the end of the bed of each one, right? And like from there, is like we didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but we knew that we needed kind of short-term storage, which is like stuff I use every single day, which is what turned out to be things like deodorant, religious ash, what do you call it, cologne, stuff like that, and then like combs. And then you had like midterm, slightly larger storage, which was the clothes I'm going to be wearing this week. And then also where I keep my dirty laundry that I'm then going to send off to the guy that comes to collect it to wash, depending on the dormitory. And you had long term, which is like sometimes my smarter clothes that I'm not going to wear all the time, but usually there's a big event that we run by the company and I'll invite everyone to come and I want to look my best, or I'm going out on the weekend and I'm single and I want to find someone to date. I want to dress in my best clothes. It then becomes longer term storage, which is more like typical wardrobe, overhead storage that I can store the things I'm going to take back at the end of the year. So we just put that all in. And then after that, we just saw how guys used it.
Did you label these areas for them? No. So you just, in your mind, you had it labeled. Like, okay, this is for this purpose, this is for this purpose. And then you just test it out, see what happens.
Exactly. So the way we thought about it is everything we put in that room had a hypothesis attached to it. And we were totally open to that being completely wrong. And some of them were super wrong. One of my favorite ones was we put mats, because they told us the guys when we first spoke to them were like, we don't like the fact that we would drag water from the bathroom into the bedroom, that you've put down this nice floor for us. So we put in bath mats or like welcome mats everywhere, within like an hour of passing the room over, they'd all moved, just gone somewhere else. We're like, huh, cool. So we saw like suddenly everything that was considered. We saw a line in the rooms, which was anything that was wet stopped at the kitchen, and you had like anything that could potentially be wet stopped at the kitchen. Anything that was dry or fine meant that they would wipe their feet at the edge of the kitchen, and they would go into the like more like communal space. And stuff like that is really hard to predict until you start testing it.
Because that's considering the people's habit of how they move around the space, right?
Which meant that a lot of like even the stuff that we were learning, we were like, oh, this would make a really cool process that we could kind of introduce. It's just like you can't really mess with very established I'm trying to think of the right word for it, like systems. It's like systems that are already in place. We tried during the prototyping to like go like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? An example of that is we tried we noticed there's so many fathers in there who are basically just become brand new fathers who are looking for advice. So it's like, can we create a group, like a digital, like I think we try to use WhatsApp for it, where we can just kind of bring them together and let them just do it all in one place. And it's like we were messing with a system that was already established. We just weren't part of it. So like they would just trust certain people, because the best example of this, we had a one room that had 3 generations of family in it. So you had a granddad who was in his, I think he was like late 50s, maybe early 60s. A dad that was like, I think he must have been like early 40s. I might be a bit wrong the ages here. And then someone who had just turned 18, all in the same village. Everyone inside of the same company had all been hired from exactly the same village in Bangladesh. And then like inside of there, it's like trying to mess with that is like you just can't. So it's like thinking about that like system wise, because everything you're doing is you're trying to scale it from this one room that we're testing in to 500,000 people across something like 100,000 rooms in the whole dormitory, system. You can't. So spatial stuff you can mess with a bit more and you can play around with. Systems was way more difficult.
It really feels like, how do you design for a civilization in which every civilization organically they bloom into something very different, right? So you have to have some structure to it, but it cannot be so rigid. It's like you were saying, like, you know, create storage in which you give them that structure, but you don't prescribe entirely like what do you put inside. So what other similar solutions do you have?
We were doing everything from onboarding to actual in-room micro stuff. So I guess like one that used all 3 of the principles that I really loved was we had a cool booth inside of the room that we were doing. We tried to separate out a space that was just for phoning home, that was multi-purpose. So for the sons, they would typically phone their parents, they would say goodnight, and then sometimes they would study or take exams in this area. And you'd have like husbands who were calling their wife to have a conversation. It's like at the moment before we got there, a lot of the guys would have to take it from their bunk, and you'd have this interesting problem where it's just like everyone's having, honestly, sometimes somewhat sensual conversations with their partners over the phone, because they're bunk beds and you're in quite a small space, like sharing a room.
Imagine you're calling someone and like above you, like just listening.
Which I actually think is worse. I think it's worse because it'd be like your family and friends are listening in on you, kind of not so much talking dirty to your wife, but like in that realm of like talking about stuff like that.
Like imagine at work you seem to be this very serious guy, and then at your bunk bed you're this like emotional teddy bear.
Like so it's like that. So it's like, can we move that to another place? What we created for that was we 3D printed a very simple signage system where they could flip it to personal, off the record, or I think the last one was like private and important. And it was the thing that was fascinating about this, which again is a super cultural thing, is you'd have guys who would actually use that for the beginning, and they realized that they didn't really have a choice. You can't stop someone in a lot of these conversations just joining. So like a best example of this, when we were trying to do research interviews inside of the dormitories, I'm used to just being like, if we were sitting opposite each other, I'd just be like, okay, I'm going to ask you some questions. The culture there, specifically from Bangladesh and India, was everyone can join. So we're trying to have this one-on-one conversation, and within like 10 minutes, there's 15 people sitting down around you to have this interview with you.
Wait, the person is asking his friends to join?
No, they just join. They just join.
Oh.
And then once it starts, people go to other rooms and bring in other people. And then like suddenly you're having like this group discussion. So it's impossible to do one-on-one interviews unless you took them out of the context, which is never as rich. So you just had to get used to doing giant focus groups all of the time.
But all these people around, are they contributing to the conversation or are they just listening?
It's a mixture. So some guys will listen and you'll see them nod in agreement or disagree, and then you can actually then
That's
probe
also good
them.
data points as well, right?
It was you'd never expect it, and it's great because we would always bring a translator in with us, and like this, I can't remember her name. That was terrible. It's been so long, but she was this lovely lady that we found on Upwork, and she would. The first time it happened to her, she was just like, she just totally expected it. And we were like so far off, just sitting there going like, what is happening? Do we stop this now so we can actually do what we're intending? And then by like the second, third session, we were like, okay, this is just reality now. And like, it was interesting because the lead researcher on this was Annabelle Hsu. Again, shout out Annabelle. And like she just dealt with it like an absolute champ. Like she was amazing at just being able to go like, cool, this is now a group session. Let me ask. And she would learn everyone's names, whoever we were interviewing. Like she would introduce herself, and she would just like point to like, oh, I see you shake your head. Why are you doing this? Stuff like that. And like, but that kind of translated to the booths that we set up, which is like you would say you're on a private call, but then people would hear a familiar voice on the phone. And they just join in the conversation. If you were studying, someone would come in your study time and ask you what you're studying. So we then learned this, like the sign we made didn't make a difference. Felt like it would, but the culture just wasn't that way. The other ones that we did inside of there were we tried some stuff outside of the room, which I think was so onboarding into a new dormitory is really hard. Because it's like joining a new city where you somehow have to kind of figure out where you fit in. And so we made like this. We borrowed from. Have you ever seen the Pokemon stamp thing in Japan where you go around and there's lots of like
collect all the stamps?
Yes, yeah. So we were like, that's cool. Great way to get people to explore. What would it look like if we did that inside one of the larger dorms? So we made this. We got, again, shout out Sylvester, who was lovely enough to let us do this. We took over the onboarding process for new hires, and we chose lots of different points around the dormitories. So things like the guy that works at the drink stall. Go meet him and he'll give you a stamp. And just had it for all the different stops. So then for the first for 2 weeks, all these guys would just learn in the first day everywhere they needed to know inside of the dormitory, instead of just learning it just by haphazard. Because a lot of the onboarding is more like, don't do this, I think we redesigned some signage at some point that was like it said, don't pee on the ground or something like that, right? And it was just like, cool. I think the people that are reading this and care about the sign don't need to be told that. It's like, so who's this really for? And a lot of it was for people that were getting very drunk. So it was like, okay, how do you design better signage?
Can that person who's drunk even read that and
no.
then not pee on the ground?
So that becomes the thing, which is like, how do you then use like positive reinforcement to go, everyone prefers it if you don't pee on the ground when they're sober, and then kind of get that messaging across at that point, rather than please don't pee on the ground, because that, I don't think has ever stopped anybody who wants to pee on the ground. One of the things that we had learned during the research is that a lot of the guys who had a good relationship with their employers would actually keep the more expensive stuff with their employer. Which was strange to us, because we were like,
they have something expensive that they bought.
Let's say laptops, yeah. So
and then
like
so
jewelry,
they will pass it to the employer to ask the employer to keep it for
to
them.
keep it safe, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we were like, surely one of the principles of being comfortable with a home away from home is that you should feel comfortable keeping your stuff in that room.
Yeah.
And the rooms had locks and padlocks on doors, but they were like really traditional, like padlock on a room that made it look like I think Yang, who works for me at Brief now, who was on this project, it's like an army locker, right? So it doesn't feel like home away from home. So we took a bunch of IKEA furniture, used their NFC, and then like set up a nice little welcome packet that included like, hey, if you want to get into your locker, just swipe this card and it'll unlock. And within like the third week, we started seeing things like jewelry, laptops, stuff like that start reappearing in the room that hadn't been there before. And it's like all we knew from that is like, all you have to do is like make it feel like a home, but make it secure, and people will bring stuff back in. But as soon as you make it either feel like a padlock on a door makes it screams, someone's going to steal my stuff, so I will put it somewhere else instead. So like figuring out like the design languages for stuff like that was a trip. I guess I'd say a lot of testing and failing. One of my favorite things that we never got to address, but we put in as a suggestion, which was every single migrant worker we spoke to told us that they met their best friend. Best friend? What just happened to my voice?
Breast
Met
meat.
best friend. Met their best friend on the plane over when they first moved to Singapore.
Why is that so?
Because it makes total sense when you think about it, right? So you're moving to a whole new country for a whole new experience.
Yeah.
There's a high chance the guy that you're sitting with is also about to do the same thing. So you're on a plane for like 4 to 6 hours. You just spend the whole time talking.
Right.
So
you
they
get
bond
there,
over
you-
the
yeah, yeah.
shared identity
over
also.
like fear, over
Yeah.
like
Expectations.
the expectation what you're gonna get.
Yeah.
If they have kids, they start bonding over that.
Yeah.
But then this is an interesting problem is that when they get there, they'll be usually working for different companies,
Yeah.
and they go to different dormitories. So during COVID, a lot of people's best friends were just halfway across the entire Singapore, and they couldn't see each other. So they'd be voice calling and video calling all day and night. Why not take a leaf out of that? I'm actually getting goosebumps talking about it because I love this one so much. It's just like, if you know everyone's arriving with their best friend, how do you make that actually into a piece of whether it's service design or just considerations, which is like, we know this is happening. It's anecdotal, but anecdotal on the point where, like, out of like 100+ interviews we did, we heard it every single time. What is that? What would it mean to design for that? And I still don't know what I would design for that. But it's just weird to think that you can pinpoint something as specific as the chair that you're sat next to is someone on a plane.
Yeah.
As such an impactful point on these guys' lives. So at minimum the next 5 years.
Right.
But nothing is done about it.
Yeah, it's like extending the customer journey. If their journey doesn't start when they arrive in Singapore,
Yes.
it actually starts on the way,
Yeah.
or even before that.
Yeah. Which I think is so cool. And it's like, it was never in our scope to deal with it, but then when we found
Yeah.
out, we were like, hey, you should definitely somehow think about this. If you want us to do it, we'll think about it, but please think about this because it's too cool to miss out. And I don't know, who knows what's happening with that yet.
So after the project ended, right? Was there any checkpoints in place to check how is it going? Is there any?
So for the actual test that we were running inside the dormitory, we knew that one was set for like 3 months of running. So anything that happened after that was kind of out of our scope, but they would look after it. So we hear from them, the dorm association, every now and again. They'll keep us updated that it's still running, some things that worked, some things that didn't. And then generally we know that some other dormitories have started implementing bits, that their own interpretation of things from the book. So we hear along that side, but I guess from a consultancy point of view, once we completed it, they kind of want to own it. And that was like one of the main things for us, which is like, it has to be the dorm association doing this,
Yeah.
so that long term all the feedback goes up to them, doesn't come back to us. Or now even though I still talk to them, I meet the guys who started the project somewhat often just to kind of catch up, and I'll hear about things that are working, and I'll hear about them going like, oh, we tried this idea, it worked terribly, we might update it in like the next edition of the book. But it's also taken form in like education. So like some of our recommendations were around the dormitory managers. So we saw really amazing dormitory managers who really, really cared about the people staying in their dormitories, and we saw ones not so much, right? Like cared, but probably pretty burnt out from COVID. Just like the level difference was quite high. So it's like, how do you take the standard of this guy on the left who's doing great, and then build courses around it to bring the people up to the same level, and like set that as your baseline. So it ended up they've now building out courses to train dormitory managers to kind of like set certain standards, which is going to become a whole thing inside of the dorm association. So
What makes a good dormitory manager?
The best way it was ever described to me, which I don't think is the nicest term, but it was by one of the best dormitory managers I met, is that he is both the son and the father figure to 400 workers inside of his dormitory. And like, I think the biggest thing is both being having a personal connection with everybody on a very it's like being a good manager. Actually, that's what it really is. It's like the ability to tell the difference between what is like personal conversation, what is work, and also really understanding where to point people when you don't have the answer. So there'll be times that people will come and they might be having a dispute with their employer. A good dormitory manager knows to not go, not my problem. I just rent you. I look after the place that you rent. It's like, hey, you should speak to this person at MOM because they cover this. Here's their contact. versus I think other ones I've seen is like really understanding their role is more than just being a manager. It's like part of it is being an event coordinator. Some of it is part of it is just being like a listening ear to people. Yeah,
part-time counselor.
yeah. Whether they like it or not. Even down to thinking about what sort of shops moving to your dormitory, what is needed next time you do a revamp, or if you're even down to which companies you're hiring to do cleaning and stuff like that, and being very involved in that entire process. But it all kind of coming from understanding those that live in your dormitory specifically. And a lot of it also comes down to those that can build good trust with the dormitory owners. So the guys that own the dorms versus the guys that manage them are very different. So one is obviously much more business orientated.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like finding that balance in between there where you get enough trust and enough autonomy to make choices, but at the same time you're able to think about that in sense of the way that we didn't at the beginning of going like, hey, we just put clocks in every room, which was not really what we intended, but like the principle's the same, because they have to think about, hey, this might cost X amount. And
Do
I think
the dormitory owners actually speak to the people who are actually living in the dormitories?
So again, it really depends, because there's so much diversity in that group.
Yeah.
The ones who are super on the ball end up going to the weddings of some of the migrant workers who go back home and get married, and they'll fly over for the weddings.
Okay.
And then you'll get some that rarely visit, might just come in to check in with their security stuff. It's a huge, because it's such a, just like any other industry, there's so much disparity between like really, really good and like bad. It's like you see, it just feels like after a while, it just feels like any other industry, I guess.
Yeah.
But the ones that I find that are really, really close to the ground give more autonomy to their managers, who then make the place a nice place to live. So it kind of scales in that way. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, actually, I don't know if there is it's like, I think it really feels very similar to all managerial roles.
Actually, you know what I was thinking? I was like, I'm thinking like, is there an underground review system within all the foreign workers? Like you know,
Glassdoor for
kind of like they rate the different dormitories. Like, this dormitory is 5 stars.
It's not even specialized. You can just go to Google and search any of the dormitories and look at the Google reviews.
Oh,
so I didn't even notice this until after the project finished.
It's all rated by...
Yeah. So you can see the guys, and like some of them, it's great, because some of the guys, I remember there's one guy that he must have been here for like 20 plus years, working in construction, and he's been to lots of dormitories. So he rates them, and he also rates the quality of food. And he's got that badge that says, local guide. Right? And like, so I look at his reviews and I'll be like, oh, it's so interesting. It's like we share similar sentiments about like what is good and what is bad, but he'll give advice on what. And like this is also like the interesting thing is like, because there's always like shifting in power dynamics, and I think at the moment they're overcapacitated at the dormitories. Like there's now, after COVID, everyone's come back to work, so there's actually not enough dormitories right now. Versus before, it was like when there was low capacity, we heard from some of the guys who were living in them that they could ask specifically to go to a specific dormitory, and then from there you just hear about like how the power shifts and being like, I want to be here. They say that to their employer, and they end up moving over. But if they move one guy over, the whole room goes. So it's like becomes this really fascinating problem.
So if we were to summarize, so you're approached by DASL, and then they give you a problem statement on how to build a home away from home for migrant workers in Singapore, which is targeting dormitories. You did on-ground research during COVID period, and then you had this whole struggle, whether it's like, is it due to COVID or is it like this long-term problem? And then you had like sieve out the real problems to address, prototype it, and then eventually end up with like a playbook.
Yes.
Then what's next? What's next in this project? Or is it
so I guess I don't know for sure, because I guess I left agency. I'm sure they're continuing the conversation.
Agency, hit us up.
And for Brief, we're in talks to take some portions of it, which I can't really talk about very much, but we're looking at it more from a literal things. So like some of the, I think I can say furniture. Okay. So we're looking at like, what would it be if we were going to take some of those furniture ideas forward? How can we make them real straight away in a way that makes sense?
These were ideas that were
all stemmed from the same book,
Okay, I see.
So
what wasn't done?
They were definitely prototyped.
Prototypes. Okay.
But then I think one of the things that we're looking at specifically as Brief is if we were to think about how you scale this up and make this achievable by everyone and purchasable by everyone, what would that take? So we're talking with them at the moment about what that might look like.
I think we have a lot of insights uncovered about this project.
I feel the most enlightening part was the fact that they have a different culture. So like the way they keep their food is not where we thought it would be. And also we were saying that it becomes like each dormitory has their own little city inside. I would think it's just normal, typical, just go there, sleep, then go to work, come back home, sleep. You know, I wasn't aware that they even have their own mama shop down there, and then they have their own barber shop maybe. Because I can understand why they have their own barber shop, because like for me, I know on some Malay guys, they would purposely just go to Malay barbers because they feel that the pakcik shop down the block, he knows how to make it better. So I think I can understand why they have that sort of things in the dormitory.
My favorite thing about that is that you can then go 2 layers deeper, which is the guys cutting your hair are typically also migrant workers. So like some of them might not even stay in that dormitory. So they might be coming from their dormitory to another dormitory to work to cut the hair of other migrant workers.
Wow.
And we were like, it's too deep. We had too many layers. So we backed out.
Alright, okay. So just to wrap up this topic, it's in the news that MOM is going to announce a new set of standards for dormitory designs. So
Did you guys celebrate when you saw this news?
I think I'm excited to see how MOM have interpreted it all. And I having met a lot of them, I think they'll do a great job. But I'll wait for it to come out. So we'll celebrate then, I think.
Okay, we will keep our eyes peeled for this piece of news as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ellie, for being so generous
Yes,
and
thanks so
sharing
much.
a lot of behind the scenes in this project.
Thank you for having me.
Just to end things, a question for you. What's keeping you busy and excited nowadays?
In general, starting my own company has been keeping me busy. It's mostly Brief, I would say, which has been, we now have an office at Telok Blangah, opposite Vivo City, which is cool. If anyone listening to this wants to come drop by, 0209, I don't mind doxing myself, it's fine. Just come say hi, it's the one with the cool sign outside. Mostly just that, just kind of spending time with family, running my business, trying to also teaching. I forget I teach. Actually, that would be a good thing. I'll share that with you too. Doing a lot of work with just students who are exploring really neat, cool subjects like palliative care, social work, even HDB corridors is something one of my students is looking at this year about the difference between public and private space in HDB. So just churning away, I would say, just living one day at a time. Got a new cat called Pickle. It's been pretty chill. My wife Megan's grandparents have moved in for us for a few months. They've moved over from China. That's been fun. My house is now only full of Mandarin, which I don't know how to speak. But they are extremely lovely people, and it's been nice having a very full house and just getting a lot of food cooked for me. Apart from that, I got...
Oh, that's the best part.
It's really good. It feels a bit guilt-ridden when I turn up and just get to eat. But aside of that, just playing video games. I got an analog pocket, if any of you have seen that, the little fake Game Boy. Mine finally arrived. And trying to find time to build keyboards.
Oh, okay.
So, haven't built one in months, but have lots unbuilt.
Wow.
And also building new jingles.
Oh yeah,
on
jingle.
SoundCloud.
Yeah, I'm gonna suggest it just on the podcast. I feel like, can I write a special one for this?
Sure.
Can I do that?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
that'll be
You
fun.
have 2 days.
Okay.
it's
I can do it.
easy for you,
I'll do it
right?
tonight.
That's a new job for Brief.
Okay.
So look forward to that in 48 hours.
Okay. I can do it.
Putting it in hours makes it more urgent.
Yeah, true. Actually, I guess the other thing, I've been making music, right? I'm doing too much. I'll do it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Cool. That's Ellie for everyone. Yay!
Thank you.
All right.
Good, bang, good, moss, good, good, bang, moss, good, bang, moss,
You have the honor to kick off with your gatam.
Cool. I'm so excited. Okay, my one is something I saw recently, which is called Oasis at Ultram. Oasis Ultram is a palliative care center. It's in Singapore. It's created by Leica Studios and Liam Foundation, where basically it's like a day hospice that is designed to be much more around maintaining I have the terms here, let me bring it up, which is the 3Ds, dignity, diversity, and development. I took my students to visit it last week, and the cool thing about it is it's just like a party zone for people that are terminally ill. So you have everything from, there's a bar in there where they'll mix you martinis. They have like a claw machine where you can like basically like gamble your heart out. But the whole thing is just, it's like taking a really hard to convince people to put their parents into, or get support around looking after their parents, into a place which is more like a community center for the terminally ill. And my favorite thing from there, which is what I really wanted to share about, is that they have this really lovely program around plants that when you first go in there, one of the things they ask you to do is to basically pot a plant, and then you look after your plant, and then if and when you pass away, the staff there will then use that plant as a way to connect with your family as a point of closure. So you'll have this plant that you've been looking after while you're there, and then they'll take it, go meet your family, check in on you, and pass the plant back as to kind of show that it's been part of your life. So
It's like a memento.
yeah, it's
Nice.
really beautifully designed. If you have either elderly parents who may be in there, it's worth just going and speaking to them about a tour. They're completely donation based. They're inside of, if you imagine this is inside of SGH. So in the middle of SGH there's a pub, is what I would say, which I found amazing. But,
Totally believable.
just absolutely bonkers. But it is just a really beautiful, well-intentioned space, which I'm very grateful exists in Singapore.
Can anyone visit it?
You can ask to go for a tour, I believe, and you can also volunteer. So if you are looking for something to volunteer towards, if you can sing karaoke, they'll let you in. They do karaoke all day, and or if you have some sort of interesting skill, especially in anything arts and crafts, they are always looking for people to volunteer and just contribute. So definitely worth looking into.
And how do you get to know this? Is it because of your teaching in palliative care in the US?
So for the last 2 years of these 3 years of teaching, I focused I did a platform called Designing for the Journey of Death. And after I ran it the third time, I was a bit like, I'd like to mix it up a bit. So I went into designing what I call compassionate creations. This is my module this year, which is like, how do you design to, against those 3Ds of dignity, diversity, and development, how do you design for that specifically last moment of meaningful care inside of inside of the terminally ill experience, if that's the right term for it. So I have a bunch of students who are in the middle of the semester right now exploring that and trying to figure out how they can have impact on it. So I took them there after begging the Hospice Association to let me in, and they very kindly gave us a 2-hour tour. It was amazing. It's cool seeing students explore that as well. The things that often don't get explored very often.
Yeah.
There's a whole other conversation.
Yeah,
Margaret
feels like a
Worker's
whole other
death.
episode. As
Yeah,
well.
we can do that. Just bring me back. I will talk about death for hours.
Yeah, I mean, it's a topic that when you get in touch with, that's a sole reminder of death. Like, you look at the world a very different way.
Yeah. I've always used it as a way to introduce my students to research practices. And my rationale is always, if you can research and interview people about death, everything else will be a walk in the park. So I throw them in at the deep end. They have to figure out how to have a really complicated conversation. They nail it every year, and they become much better researchers for it. So shout out to my students too. If you're listening, they will listen.
Oh, nice. Cool. Thanks, Ellie.
Thanks. So for my good terms, is basically, I don't know whether you guys heard of the behavioral sing theory.
No.
No.
Okay.
Tell us.
So basically, I found this video on YouTube. Behavioral sing theory is basically, in the 1940s, there was this ethologist called John B. Calhoun, Calhoun. Yeah, so basically he coined this term behavioral sing to describe the collapse in behavior which resulted from overcrowding. So when I found this, I was like, wow, this is such suitable terms
Yeah,
for this
totally.
episode,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's actually on the topic of dormitories. Yeah, so in the 1940s, he set out on a series of experiments to actually examine the role of crowding and social density in a given space.
Wow.
So he wanted to see how it would affect people, but he did the experiment on rats.
Of course.
Ethical.
Of course.
Yeah, I can find the image and then we can share it in the podcast. So in summary, basically what he did was he chose 5 pregnant Norway rats, but these rats are not from Norway. Funnily enough,
Norway rats that aren't from Norway.
yeah.
No way.
There's a pun. So he put them. He built this like a rat heaven. He put them in an enclosure that contained food, water, shelter, space that 5,000 rats would need.
Wow.
So imagine having 5 rats inside there. So it's basically like rat heaven, basically, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So he observed them for 16 months, and then eventually what happened was over time, of course the rats accumulated, but then he realized that certain areas, like there would be 20-30 rats, but then certain areas would be empty and untouched. And then the funny thing was, like the female mices was so much that they decided not to nurture the young, because there's too many younglings for them to nurture. So some of them get abandoned, or the other male mouse come to them because they want to do their deed, you know. Yeah. Because
Populate. You mean,
yes,
like.
populate. Yeah. So because food and water is all sufficient, so some of these mouses, they eventually outgrow their need for survival. They became a bit like narcissistic. They became like, I don't care about living anymore. I'm just going to go to the higher ups of the housing area, and I don't care about everyone else living underneath. And they decided not to populate. They decided not to start attacking. They are just on their own, and they will just laze around. Yeah.
Wait, so how did he apply this to?
Yeah, that's the
humans?
thing.
Okay.
So there were a lot of people that actually saying that having those rats in that enclosure was not an accurate observation of humans, because when compared to humans, what happens if there's overcrowding? People usually will tend to over engage with each other. Yeah. But rats didn't do that. So some people just think of it as it was an interesting experiment. Yeah, but it's just not an accurate representation of humans.
That's cool. I mean, that even sounds like, yeah, when you were saying that, I was like, I wonder if rats have like welfare, you know? Because like, yeah, as soon as you like see rat younglings, I guess it's the right term, rat babies, abandoned. Yeah, I guess human nature would be to create social safety nets for them. But I guess rats don't have that concept.
yeah, that's why. So I thought that was just an interesting experiment for us to take note. Right,
So the sink in the behavioral sink is like the innate behavior of rats dissipates when overcrowding happens.
Yes.
Is that what it means?
Basically, he was trying to actually observe that to apply it to humans, but I guess it failed because rats behave differently when it's overcrowding. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wish this is actually translating to humans. You know, like the part that it's a failed experiment kind of like disappoints me.
Is it definitely failed? So is it considered?
Yeah,
it is
failed.
failed. Wow,
It's
that
failed.
sucks.
Yeah.
That sucks.
I guess it translates to human is in a sense because rats, they don't have brains like us, and then in a way that
All the rats hotter.
in
They're
a way,
gonna like protest like KSDR doesn't
You know-
understand us.
in a way that because as humans, if there's overcrowding for us, maybe we will function differently.
So my Gatam, it's about 12 favorite questions by Richard Feynman. So Richard Feynman is this rather famous physicist who also assisted in the work on the atomic bomb. Yeah.
Sick. Good start.
So he's also like this genius lah. The reason why he's famous is because he is very into teaching people how to think like a genius. Yeah. What I like about Richard Feynman and his 12 favorite questions is more of like guiding questions that like how do you continuously spark curiosity in your life? So how he does it is that he established this list of 12 questions that is big enough for you to pursue throughout your life. An example for Richard Feynman, right, is like, first, how do I accurately keep track of time in my head? It's a question that you won't get an answer straight away. So it puts you on this expedition to find an answer for yourself. And the answer is always, it can go in a lot of ways. Because he's a physicist and he's also an engineer. So is how can we design a large-scale computing system using only basic equipment?
And is it the same 12 questions regardless? Is it the same 12 questions for everybody?
You can create your 12 favorite questions. What 12 should you have that always spark curiosity in your life?
So do you actually strive to answer this question, or you live your life with this question unanswered?
The reason why it sparks your curiosity is because you will then, with these questions, set your life to try to answer them.
Wow. So you have all 12 for you?
So I am in the process of crafting. I can share some of my questions that I have crafted. So I have 3 currently. How do I be inspired by everyone around me? Yeah.
Nice.
So I once made this very insensitive comment to my ex-colleague, which is I find certain people very boring. And my colleague actually said, why? Because everyone is interesting in every way. So I think that was the point where I realized, that is true. It started with me first. Like, I wasn't seeing people in the right frame of mind. Yeah. So that was that first question that I want to like challenge myself lah. And then the second is, how do I build deep relationships with my loved ones while serving my needs in life?
Wow.
Yeah. So how do I find that balance? And it's almost conflicting in some ways. And the third one is, if my body parts could speak, how do I know what they are trying to tell me?
I guess if it's in pain, you will know.
Let's say if my shoulders could speak.
One of these is unlike the other two. I mean, I like it, but what?
I can tell you what they need though. Aches means you need a massage. Rashes means you need more sleep.
I guess this question is answered then. Okay, so I only have 2 questions in my life. Yeah.
Wow, the third one is very interesting. Yeah, I think I resonate with that. I think I could ask the third one. I think the body speaking to me one. I think I could benefit from that question also. I have the worst posture in the world. What is my back trying to say to me?
Right.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
But then I'll just feel guilty all the time. I just feel bad.
But I like the first question though. How do I be inspired by everyone around me?
I don't know if you all have any like first draft.
I have one that just came across my mind. What am I learning today?
Yeah.
Or if we could flip that, right? It could be, what could the world learn from my life?
Wow. Autobiography.
Treat every day like an autobiography.
Oh, that is like...
If my life is an autobiography...
No, if my life is a documentary...
If my life is a documentary...
What's today's
How
lesson?
many advertisements?
What do the advertisements say? Oh, interesting.
Oh no, one more I ever thought. This is about death basically.
Yeah, nice. Right up my street, let's go.
Yes. If it was my eulogy, what would it say? What would I want people to say about me?
I think the only one I've got off the top of my head is the same reason I got this tattoo, which I'm pointing at, which is I got this tattoo to make sure that I would never have to work in a job where I wear a suit. So if I had to wear it, it would just pop out, and to hold myself accountable to like. So like my one would be something along the lines of, how do I make sure that I earn enough to look after myself forever, without sacrificing my values and principles?
I guess there's like 2 layers of questions, because you got to know what's your principles in life.
Let me reframe it the way that you did with your body then. Okay. If my values and principles were tiny little creatures, what would they shout at me every day?
Wake up!
Yes.
True.
Yes,
Sleeping in
I
is one of my
like
principles.
where this is going.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think that's a better phrasing, and it's more memorable. Yeah.
Wait. So when do you have until to finish all 12 of your questions?
I guess it's an ongoing journey.
Just the
lor.
rest of your life.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it's like first being more aware of what piques your interests, or like, you know, where does your energy goes to in life. Then you kind of like distill them and transform them into a question that you don't mind keeping at the back of your head for the rest of your life.
But at the same time, I would think that it might also be depending on your season of your life.
Yeah,
Right.
I guess
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I guess the questions moves along with you growing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe if
Which is
you
quite
have
fun
one
as
question
well.
and then you realize that I think I've answered this question. I think
Wow.
I'm ready to move on. Then you move to a new question.
That's cool. But I guess there might also be questions that you never change.
Ah,
You know, I mean, that'd be interesting to see the balance between those. Because there's definitely things that I believe in now that I did not believe in when I was like 16, 17. Versus there's things that have been consistent all the way through. I guess a mix would be cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Nice.
So, wow, we have Oasis at Outram, behavioral sync theory, and 12 favorite problems in life.
Oh,
Very philosophical.
yes,
very
really,
philosophical.
very. Like whole
Very good.
lifetime thing.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks
Okay.
again, Ellie,
Thank
for
you for
joining
having me.
us.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for accepting
Had a
our
blast.
invitation for this interview.
No worries. Thank you for having me. I'll come back for death. Let me know when.
Sure.
I'll be waiting outside for the recording. Very good. Yeah, thank you though.
cool.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.